I met Krishnamurti in Rome in 1968 when I was working on a movie with Fellini. I spoke no Italian, so he had given me an interpreter who also happened to be his personal astrologer. One day, she said to me, "You've been invited to a lunch with Krishnamurti." I said, "Who's Krishnamurti?" "Well," she then replied in a hushed tone, as if I should know, "Well, you know, he's Krishnamurti." I asked, "Is he a film director?" No, she said, "he's a sage." Now, I was 27 and famous, but really I'm just an East End spiv, and right then I was winging it. The only sage that I knew of went into the stuffing that my mother made at home for our roast dinners. All the same, I was interested enough to go along to the luncheon party. It was only years later that I found out how I actually came to be there. Fellini had an amazing script that he wanted to shoot, but needed insight. So he asked Vanda Scaravelli, who knew Krishnamurti, and Fellini asked her to be introduced to him next time he was in Rome. A few months later, Krishnamurti was in town, and she arranged for them to meet. Hearing that he loved movies, Fellini cut together about 15 minutes of the rushes of the film that he and I were making. He then showed it to him to break the ice. And apparently, when the short film finished, Fellini said, "I'd like to meet that boy," meaning me. And that was why I was invited to lunch. When I arrived, the place was crowded, but I still ended up at a table opposite Krishnamurti himself. We didn't speak at all. But because I was staring at him, he continually lowered his eyes out of politeness. I remember thinking that I had never met anybody like that. It was really unusual. Then, after the lunch, he was answering questions for the press people there, and his secretary, Alan Naudet, came over to me and said, "Would you like to go for a walk with Krishnamurti?" I said yes. So he and I went out for this long walk around the suburbs of Rome. And not having had the nerve to speak with him during lunch, I suddenly couldn't stop chattering. At a certain point on the walk, we stopped, and he put his hand on my arm and said, "Look at that tree." And I looked. It was a tree. I looked at him. He smiled. I smiled. We carried on walking. I carried on talking. 10 minutes later, he stopped me again and said, "Look at that cloud." And I looked again. Cloud. Wasn't special, not lit from within or anything like that. It was a cloud, that's all. On we went, and I kept talking. That was my first meeting with Krishnamurti. However, I was never the same after that meeting. Something shifted. He did something to me, which I understood years later. He used his presence to pause my own thinking, and something inside started reaching back out towards me. From then on, every time I saw that he was giving a talk, I would try and go. And likewise, he would always try and make sure that I was invited. I wouldn't really get what was being said, but unbeknownst to me, I was being refined. In later conversations, the same thing would happen. We would start off talking about material things like shirts and shoes, and yet a shift would occur. His tone of voice would not necessarily change, but something subtle would take place. I can only liken it to the Cole Porter lyric, "How strange the change from major to minor." It took me maybe 15 years to understand sayings like, "When the eagle flies, it leaves no mark, and the observer is the observed." I might not have been sure about what he was saying, But there was always this shift.